you, everyone. So I'm Mei Lin Fung, and this is some of what I've done. But probably the thing that I'd like you to know in this crowd with the crowdsourcing is that I am one of the 2 people in the first skunkworks program that invented CRM, customer relationship management, and that automated sales and marketing back in 1989. I think we're at a pivotal point now, and so I've been working on various things, which you see. I'm working at the IEEE as Vice Chair of Internet Inclusion, because this year, 50% of the world, we will have reached the point where 50% of the world are on the internet. But how they got on is going to be very different from the next 50%. And I think crowdsourcing is going to play a role in that. On the World Economic Forum, I am particularly interested in digital Asean. This is a region of 620 million people in Southeast Asia, and we'll go into that a little bit further. But I come from Singapore, which is really a first world city, country in the middle of ASEAN, and I help pivot Singapore towards looking at its neighbors, and so that's part of what I'm working on, digital transformation of the whole region of Southeast Asia. And finally, the World Economic Forum has coined the term the Fourth Industrial Revolution, and the digital economy and society is what I'm one of the global network of experts working on that council for the last couple of years. So I'm going to share some of the thinking that we have been doing, and in particular, the focus is on business to business. Okay, next.
You can try the clicker. I think it's
good. Good, great.
Hang on. There we go. It's this one here to the right.
Okay, great. Thank you. So how many of you know what IPv4 is? That's okay. IPv4 is the Internet Protocol version 4, which set out the addressing scheme for how to connect to things on the internet. So if you take all of the addresses of IPv4, it's the current version that most of the internet is connected on now, and you put those addresses in the size of a beach ball. We have a new protocol coming up called IPv6. We missed IPv5, and that protocol had to be put in place because we ran out of addresses, and so we don't have enough space right now. But what are we doing for IPv6? And that's creating a vast new world. And this is especially required for the Internet of Things. So that's what's happening next, is if we look at the IPv4 addresses and put them in the size of the beach ball, IPv6 addresses are the volume of the sun. So the change that we have to really consider with crowdsourcing is how can we as a people, as humanity, actually reach out to that frontier and make sure that it remains human, where people are in the center of all of this. So that's the challenge for us. B2C, business to consumer, is what a lot of people are familiar with because we're all consumers and we know how businesses work with us, and the whole advertising world is geared around that. But in fact, business to consumer is just the tip of the iceberg of any economy. So I just think of business, B2C is the top of the iceberg, but B2B is where all the majority of transactions happen, and that's already happening online. So already the B2B transactions are much, much greater, 2.5 to 3 times the number of transactions are happening B2B than on B2C. So why am I bringing this up? Because what's happening in the B2B world is really of great interest for crowdsourcing, because we as people are not just consumers, we are producers too, we earn incomes. How do we plug into this digitally transformed economy, and how do we make sure that we stay relevant? So there's a lot of talk about robots taking over and AI eliminating jobs. But this is the same kind of talk that happened at the actually very, very beginning of the 20th century, with the majority of jobs were in agriculture. Now agricultural jobs are 1 to 2% of the economy. We have new kinds of jobs, and there will be new kinds of jobs. But we have a choice now where we are and where we sit about what those kinds of jobs are going to be. I know it seems like, well, somebody in government or in a big company is going to decide, but actually, I don't think that's going to be the case, because the plunge to the frontier of the sun, where the big governments and big businesses have really dominated our lives at the beach ball level, when we go to the sun, crowdsourcing is going to play a much greater role. In fact, the number one topic that we discovered within the World Economic Forum for the benefits and risks of the digital economy and society was participation by all. And participation by all won't be in the way that it's been. Just like agriculture turned into industrial jobs, the kinds of industrial jobs of one person, full employment, full-time, it's going to change. People are going to be able to work in ways which take advantage of their greatest skills, but also be on a lifelong learning trajectory where the skills you're learning now and acquiring and organizing towards will actually help you get towards the kinds of work you want to do. So I envisage that we'll have a kind of a GPS for careers. You say, oh, I want to have that kind of job in 5 years. How do I get there? What are the kinds of sub-projects, and where do I need to be working to acquire the skills to get there? And we will have that kind of GPS, and that's what I see machine learning and AI helping us do. That was backwards, I see. Okay. So in Singapore, it's a very rich little country. 12 of the top 10 sovereign wealth funds, 2 of the top 10 sovereign wealth funds are from Singapore. It's a country of 5 million people. It's the only country with sovereign wealth funds in the top 12 that has no natural resources, only people, not even enough water. So the investment in people has been a really big focus of Singapore. And Singapore has committed and is committed $4 billion to looking at industry transformation in the digital age. $1 billion each year since 2015. And they have been working to see how will industries transform and what are the kinds of skills and jobs that will be needed. So I've given one example, a service industry, tourism, that they've kind of divided it up. Singaporeans are kind of very OCD and divide it all up and work it out and project. And I don't think there's any real finalized answer, but the idea is that every 3 years this gets updated and you're kind of tracking the curve of what's going on in tourism. So they identified 91 technical skills and 18 generic skills that they needed to train the people of Singapore for to be prepared for the jobs of the future. And then they actually also looked skill by skill, job by job. Where was it going? Where could it go? So the expansion of the job and what new skills would be required. I'm bringing this up because I just want you to know that people are doing this kind of industry projection. Singapore has done it for 33 industries. I'm right now working with Salesforce to plug into what Singapore's got is early curriculum for jobs in 33 industries. And Salesforce is looking at how can their online learning platform, Trailhead, actually be used to help prepare people for the jobs of the future. So, and certainly it won't be just Salesforce alone. We would like to pair up with all kinds of online learning platforms and peer-to-peer learning. So I'm switching industries now from tourism to agriculture. This is a slide by Robert C. He is the state coordinator for California for the US Department of Agriculture. It's a busy slide because it's actually 4 of his slides all crammed into one. He did this, but I just wanted to give you an idea about what's happening in the area of agri-analytics, that people are looking at the full chain of agriculture and how that's going to be transformed by the internet and the Internet of Things. These kinds of changes are just going to completely change not just agriculture, but what I call the food to health chain. Today, so much is left to waste or goes bad. We throw out half the food we buy because we don't cook it in time. And that's when it reaches us. Before it reaches us, there's tons of waste along the food chain. What the Internet of Things could be doing is actually helping us track. Is it being stored at the right temperature? What needs to go where by when, and so on. So agri-analytics is going to transform agriculture. But what does this mean if we want it to be people-centered? So I want to tell a little story about Siam Organic. Siam Organic is a rice farmer co-op in Thailand. They managed to raise the income of the rice farmers from 40 cents a day to $5.80 a day. And they did it by organizing them to actually become co-op owners in a rice mill. And one of the daughters of the farmers got an MBA and worked out how to plug into the kind of global supply chain to supply their rice, which is non-GMO and organic. And I want to say what this agri-analytics provides is the possibility. You could actually have, when you serve your child a plate of rice, you could have a QR code. This hasn't happened yet, but this is what's possible, that says, that allows you to click and see where was the field that rice was grown. Where was it stored before it went into the rice mill? Where did the rice mill send, what ship did it come on? How long did it stay on the docks at Los Angeles? What truck did it come over? This is the promise of agri-analytics, that you actually can track your food and the hygiene of your food and the safety of your food in huge new ways. But how do we keep the person at the center of all of this technology? There's a group in Asia called Grow Asia. They're a spin-off from Grow Africa, and these are people who are thinking about the supply chain of food, both in Africa and in Asia. So what this does is it puts the smallholder farmer at the center of the whole process, that it organizes all of the supply chain components around them. And we are right now within Southeast Asia thinking about what is the digital supply chain within Southeast Asia that would allow us to organize around the smallholder farmer to make sure that farmer, he, and his family actually, even as we as consumers can eat the rice and know where it came from, those smallholder farmers actually get their just-in-time education and learning and fertilizer and implements, and are connected to Unilever and Nestle in a way that creates new products that people want. And so this is the P2P economy that we're seeing come up in the end. People producing the food, people consuming the food, and then what is the supply chain that's needed? So I just wanted to say, it was not that long ago, 1994. I know that date well because that was when my daughter was born, so she's 24 now. In 1994, Jeff Bezos was just imagining what was possible. And he said, I'm going to start Amazon. And now that's worth $790 billion today. I just looked it up. And that has happened in 24 years. I believe that people in the future will wish they were here now to be able to have the kind of insight that Jeff Bezos had at the very, very beginning of the consumer web. We are at the beginning of the producer web. And what will we need? So I'm shifting now. What will we need to take advantage of all of these developments? it's like we're going from cow paths to superhighways. That's actually what's going to happen. How do we learn to drive? How do we learn to navigate? How do we work out where we need to go? So for 4 years, I was part of the Department of Defense's think tank on the future of health. This is from 2009 to 2013. And we really came up with networks would be the future of health, that networks would be required. But now how do we operate with network skills? And in fact, we examined all the things that hadn't gone right in health and Department of Defense, as well as the Public Health Service and so on. We held multiple roundtables and came up with these skills. And these skills were what were not being taught, not even being recognized as needed, but now we see that for operating in a network world, these are the skills. And I'm more than happy to give these slides to anyone who wants them. But these are the new kinds of skills about listening, about tuning in, about setting goals in a networked way, being participative, but yet structurally organized. And yesterday I was in the collective intelligence discussions, and he showed the trend micro guy, and he showed, swarms of birds and schools of fish. And really, it actually had to do with the communication fish to fish and bird to bird, but that still let that happen. So these are those kind of bird to bird, fish to fish communication and skills that we will need for a networked future. And so finally, I'm just going to say what we came up with. How do we feel that we are actually going to survive in this? Because it's going from the beach ball to the sun is much, much bigger than the Lewis and Clark expedition. How do we get out there and actually do something that is good for us as humans? And today, a lot of us feel this is an ABC model: attitudes, behavior, and circumstance. We let circumstances, the news of today, hate to remind you, drive our attitude and our behavior about how exhausted we feel and how we just feel on a treadmill of bad news. And that makes us feel, blaming, justifying. And that doesn't actually lead us to action. And so what I claim for to go to the sun in a way that's human-centered, people-centered networks, we have to shift to the other, the right-hand side picture, which says, what is our aspiration? What do we want? What kind of community, what kind of home do we want? How do we want to live? And use that to drive our behaviors and set goals and work with each other that tunes in to create productive networks. And that can drive the circumstances so that we can live in a world where we use our resources wisely and work well with each other and live well. However, that will need feedback, and so we have to keep adjusting. But crowdsourcing has the potential to move in this kind of way where we can organize ourselves to adapt to the new skills. I will leave with a final quote from the person I worked with. I worked with Douglas Engelbart, the inventor of the computer mouse. This year is the 50th anniversary of what they call the mother of all demos. In 1968, Douglas Engelbart showed the mouse, hypertext, hyperlinks, everything. This was at a time when people were using punch cards. So 50 years ago, Engelbart said that technology is more important than the invention of writing and the invention of the printing press. That's how much change the technology we have today is going to change us. And so we're really at the beginning of a very long journey, but the more of us that understand that we can control it, we are not subject to kings and emperors and media barons, certainly not media barons, the tech barons. And so we can do this, but we have to organize ourselves. So this is why the people-centered internet was founded, because we are shifting from the power of governments to the power of our communication systems. And only if people stand up to create the internet that we want to see, will we be able to have an internet of the people, by the people, and for the people. Thank you.
We have time for one or two questions. Do you have a question for me? Anyone?
I might. No.
He does, he has.
Of course, of course, of course. Please.
How do you perceive, in general, the notion of crowdsourcing in the Southeast Asia region and even going into China as well? Obviously, you've got different types of political institutions and political frameworks in this region, and do they have different connotations and perspectives of crowdsourcing?
Yeah, they do, but crowdsourcing isn't a term there the way it is here. So in Southeast Asia, there are 40 million smallholder farmers. So this is a large number. It's quite different from in the sort of developed world. And so they need to work out ways to plug in. Right now, they're being exploited, like the rice farmers, 40 cents a day. When they began to organize themselves, $5.80 a day. That's a huge transformation. So they have great incentive to plug into frameworks and networks that'll give them more control and power over how they produce their rice and sell it.
So do you think it's in the government's interest to have the population, including these farmers, as connected as possible?
Oh, yes. And that's actually, I think Southeast Asia is a great new potential model. So North America and the EU have really started with the internet and just moved forward. In a way, it's a little behind because it hasn't been able, it's still using legacy systems. Okay. China came in later, and the World Bank has highlighted the existence of Taobao villages, which is how Taobao, which is one of the Chinese marketplaces, actually allows people within the Taobao village to plug into this global supply chain through Taobao. And so China has had a different model, which is actually quite state-dictated and shaped. And so what we're hoping to see, and a lot of us are working to build, is in Southeast Asia, a hybrid model that allows people-centered networks. Thank you.
Thank you again.